So we finally got the materials, and we got a book that Margaret mentioned, Occupied America, teaching the kids that Arizona, California, New Mexico, and some other areas were taken from Mexico in 1848 should be given back. We got a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is a well-known Brazilian Marxist. And I believe these kids, parents and grandparents, came to this country, most of them legally, because this is the land of opportunity. And they trust their kids to our schools, and we need to teach these kids that this is the land of opportunity, and if they work hard, they can achieve anything they want to, and not teach them that they're oppressed. And in fact, when my bill to put a stop to this came before the Senate Judiciary Committee, they sent out a bunch of kids to talk about how much they love their Raza Studies course. And one of the senators said to a girl, couldn't you learn this in other courses? And she said, no, before I took Raza Studies, I didn't realize that I was oppressed. Now that I took the course, I realized that I'm oppressed. Well, we got a bill through to put a stop to it. As Margaret mentioned, it takes effect December 31st. And if Margaret is elected superintendent, she will pursue that. And if I'm elected attorney general, I'll give her the legal help I need, because what we can do is take away 10% of their entire budget, which means they'll come into compliance, because no school district ever defies a 10% reduction in their budget. But they have a right to appeal to an administrative law judge. So if I'm attorney general, I'll give Margaret all the help she needs to be sure that we teach our kids to be proud individuals, to treat each other as individuals, and to be patriotic Americans, and we're going to get that done. If elected Attorney General, I have three priorities. The first is to guard the border and fight illegal immigration. I have a number of specific proposals, because I think the current Attorney General has downgraded the priority of this. So I would reopen the Douglas office, which he closed. I would beef up the Nogales office, which is down to one person. I would form partnerships with local law enforcement to fight illegal immigration. I would beef up the civil remedies section. This is the section that seizes assets from drug smugglers and money launderers, and every lawyer in that section makes many times his or her salary in the assets they bring into the Attorney General's office, which can be used by the Attorney General's office. And they've been cut back so far that they tell me that they're turning away good cases on a routine basis. And that's a false economy, because if you beef it up, they'll make many times the cost in bringing in assets. And then I would help lead the fight to pressure the federal government to finish building the fence and to put adequate people on our border. Because right now, as our Secretary of Homeland Security, we have Janet Napolitano, who when she was governor said, if you build a 20-foot wall, they can always have a 20-foot ladder. And I copy the joke of one of my fellow candidates who says, it's easier to catch them if they're crossing the desert with 21-foot ladders. I was in Naco a couple of weeks ago, and there's a great double fence, just like in San Diego, two fences with a road in between for patrolling. It goes for 400 feet. So those of you who remember the Maginot Line in World War II, a chain is no stronger than its weakest link. So we need to complete that fence. And then we need at least 6 border guards every 12 miles. 12 miles is an appropriate length to patrol. If you have a fence to slow them down, you need 6 people, because to staff it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you need 5.6 people. If we could finish the fence and get at least 6 people every 12 miles, we could put a dead stop to illegal immigration, and the Arizona Attorney General should be leading the fight to pressure the federal government to do that, and I will do that. And I think I noticed someone in the far table has the literature of my opponent, which is I'm for amnesty, which is ridiculous. I've always been against amnesty. He makes things up. And that's the reason that he's under investigation now by the FBI and the state bar, because he made things up when he prosecuted all of his political opponents, and they all got dropped or dismissed. And even went after 4 judges who had ruled against him, 3 of which had found his actions to be unethical in 3 different situations. And then when it came time to put up evidence, he had to drop the case because he had no evidence. And as an excuse, he said the federal government had agreed to take over the case, and the federal government the next day said they agreed to no such thing. He had made it up, just as he made up the things in the pamphlet you have there. And certainly, it's absurd to say that I'm for amnesty. I've always been utterly opposed to amnesty. Second priority is to rigorously enforce the law so we're safe in our homes and our communities. I'm proud to say I'm endorsed by the Highway Patrol Association. That is, they're the ones that have to enforce the law every day. They need an Attorney General to support them, and I'm proud they've chosen me as the best one to do that. And third priority is to create a legal atmosphere that's conducive to business growth. Because without a healthy business environment, everything else fails. Education fails, everything else fails. And that means you have to enforce the law vigorously, but objectively. Never for political benefit, personal political benefit, never for personal political retaliation. And I mention that because a court specifically found that my opponent had prosecuted cases for political benefit and political retaliation, which was what led to the bar complaint. If you have that in an Attorney General, businesses won't want to come to Arizona, will have no economic future. I pledge that as Attorney General, I will enforce the law vigorously, but objectively, never for political advantage, never for political benefit. You're a great audience. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to this.
Joe Arpaio, I know he's in the news and having a lot of heat from the feds. Would you defend him and how
Yes,
can you
yeah. I'm running against Andy Thomas, not Joe Arpaio. I've always been a supporter of Joe Arpaio's. I contributed to his campaigns. I carried legislation for him when I was in the legislature. He endorsed me when I ran for the legislature. He's been sheriff for 17 years, which is practically before Andy Thomas was born. And he did a lot of things that needed to be done. He got tough on crime when a lot of people, including myself, felt that was needed. So I'll get along just fine with Joe Arpaio.
In the process of writing my books and promotion, I talked to a lot of people. I was surprised that some people don't know where China is and who Stalin was.
Right.
My question is, do you think education of history of the world is as important, or?
Yes, I do think so. I definitely think so. And if you read our standards, go to our website. It's azed.gov. That's our official website. My campaign website is electtomhorne.com, but our official website, azed.gov. You can read our history standards. I think you'd be very pleased. All the things that you mentioned are in our standards and a lot more. The problem we have, and maybe I didn't tell you the story. Remember I mentioned that I brought back the teaching of a lot of things that had been left out in high school. Having completed that, I looked at the standards kindergarten through 12th grade because I believe it's what you're exposed to when you're very young that has resonance for you later on. And so in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, we can't teach history in depth, but if you expose the kids to it, they'll learn it in much greater depth when they get to high school. And so that was a much bigger fight. That took 2 years because a lot of teachers came to the state board and objected and said it was too much work and they didn't want to do it and so on. But we finally won that fight. We got what I call content-rich history standards, both American and world history. And the chief historian for the History Channel held a press conference and said she had read the history channels for all history standards for all 50 states, and Arizona was head and shoulders above the other 49 states, something I'm very proud of. Now, there's one other step, though, and Margaret mentioned this. We need to test for the standards, because standards don't do any good if you don't test for them, because teachers can ignore them if you're not testing. A lot of schools are conscientious and they teach the standards, but others don't. They're just concerned about the test. And we now test in reading, writing, math, and science. We don't yet teach in history. And so for several years now, I've been pushing the legislature to give us an Ames test in history, and I'll be appreciative if you'll all talk to your legislators and support that, because once they're tested in it, they'll know the standards because they want to graduate,
right.
and you'll run into a lot less people who don't know who Stalin was.
It is important because the bad ideas, a lot of bad ideas, socially come from outside and being settled here in dark corners of our society.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Tom, I voted early and I voted for you.
Thank you.
I'm very tempted to go back and vote again. But I know it's against the law, and when you become Attorney General, you throw me into the big house.
No, I make an exception for that.
But I have a question regarding 1070.
Yes.
To what extent do you think that 1070 can have an impact on the comprehensive immigration reform that has been talked about?
Okay.
And secondly, to what extent can the legal procedure right now underway impact that influence?
Okay. When we talk about Senate Bill 1070, let me say that I view Senate Bill 1070 as a force multiplier for our border guard. Because right now we have a lot of border guard people that are not on the border. They're back on the highways, they're in Kingman, they're in Casa Grande, I don't know if you've seen them here in Flagstaff, but they're around the state. If local law enforcement is required to help the border guard enforce immigration law, then the border guard can be on the border and do their job there where it's most important. And in that sense, it's a force multiplier. And in that sense, it's not contradictory to federal law, it's in support of federal law. And so I believe if I'm Attorney General, I can win that case in the U.S. Supreme Court just as I won Horne versus Flores in the Supreme Court. Now, the other thing you asked me about was comprehensive immigration reform. When you hear the word comprehensive immigration reform, what Democrats mean by that is a path to citizenship. If 11 million people become citizens, they bring over their families. Now we got 55 million, and almost all of them are going to vote Democrat, and no Republican will ever win an election. So it's a partisan thing. I think they would have, if they didn't have the path to citizenship, I think the Republicans and the Democrats would agree on a comprehensive bill that would give renewable work permits to people and so on, and regularize it. But the Democrats are insisting on a path to citizenship. I believe the Republicans will never agree to that.
I'm gonna ask the last question because I can because I'm started the clock. Where does Arizona rate nationally, and have we been in education?
In our test scores, we're above the national average. In our funding, we're 49th out of 50.
Wow.
So I've always believed that one of my jobs as superintendent is to emphasize accountability, and this would be Margaret's job, to emphasize accountability so that when the economy turns around and there are more revenues available, a high priority is given to K-12 education. Because in education we have something called the coefficient of effectiveness. The coefficient of effectiveness means if you have a high coefficient of effectiveness, it means if you put more resources into education, you get academic results. A low coefficient of effectiveness means you put resources, you don't get academic results. You can have a zero coefficient of effectiveness, which means you put resources and you get no results, which is what happened with Title I, which led to No Child Left Behind, where they put in accountability. And so I believe my job in part was to show the legislature that we have a high coefficient of effectiveness because we're holding people accountable, so that when revenues become available, we put a high priority in K-12 education. I believe if we could get our resources up to the national average, we'd be in the top 10 states academically because we do hold everybody accountable.
Thank you.